The wind spilling out of the Santa Cruz hills sliced through Silver Cross like a sharpened edge that late winter morning, slipping past cracked shutters and under the warped eaves of the trading stalls. It carried cold dust, the bite of horse sweat, and the weary scent of old sorrow things the town had learned to live with. Folks drifted through the marketplace, wrapped in patched-up coats, fabric worn so thin the original color had long vanished. Hunger shaped people that way. Fear did too. When the sun finally eased itself over the ridge, its weak light fell on a sight that froze every conversation mid-word. A rough-cut wooden post stood planted in the very center of the square. From its crossbeam hung a rope twisted into a crude noose, heavy and mean in the pale glow. And beneath it, her hands tied behind her back. Her boots were half buried in frost, Veyra Quinn. Her skin was washed out from the cold and from the bruises blooming along her cheekbone. Someone had struck her while dragging her across the square before dawn. She hadn't cried out then, and she wasn't doing it now, though her breath shook in thin white ghosts as if ready to slip out of her body. Olin strutted before her like a man practicing a speech he thought made him important. Thick-waisted cheeks flushed with whiskey rather than winter wind. His leather gloves were far too fine for a town scraping by on dwindling flour rations. Folks whispered he controlled half the food in Silver Cross. Some claimed he controlled half the sheriff's backbone, too. He jabbed a finger at Veyra. She stole from my store. Bread. And in a season like this, stealing food is a crime against the whole town. His voice carried across the square, bouncing off the shuttered fronts of the saloon and the telegraph office. A few muttered agreement, not out of conviction, but because disagreeing with him was dangerous. Veyra lifted her chin, the rope scraping her collarbone. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice raw and cold-bitten. "You planted that sack in my room. I saw you." Drex Malron's smile never reached his eyes. "Watch your mouth, girl. Tell them," she snapped louder this time. "Tell them why you're lying." The crowd stirred uneasily. Two older women glanced at each other. A ranch boy stared at his boots. No one stepped forward. Drex spread his arms wide. "She denies it. Of course she does. That's what thieves do." What he didn't mention was what Veyra had shouted at him the night before. In the back of his store, he'd cornered her against a shelf stacked with sacks of beans and offered her protection if she agreed to be his woman. She refused. And at dawn, men hammered on her door, hauling her out before she could lace her boots. The town knew Drex's nature, but they also knew his warehouse held the flour sacks keeping their children alive. Silver Cross had no room for moral courage in a winter like this. The rope tightened. Veyra flinched but didn't bow. A hush fell. People shifted back as a tall figure emerged from behind the horse pens at the edge of the market. He walked without hurry, long coat brushing his boots, carrying the dust of many miles. His hair was black as crow feathers, braided in the Apache way. His skin sun-browned and wind-carved like a man shaped by open land. A whisper cut through the crowd barely dared Raik. He'd come to town to sell 3 desert-born horses, strong-necked and sure-footed. Folks tolerated him, because he never caused trouble and spoke only when needed. Still they kept their distance. A widowed Apache with old grief behind his eyes made white townsfolk uneasy. Raik stopped beside his horses, sweeping the scene with one steady, unblinking look. The rope, the post, the bruised woman beneath it, the man puffing up like a rooster above her. His jaw clenched. Drex sneered at him. "This ain't your business, Indian. Move along." Raik didn't answer. He set down the horse's lead rope and walked toward the post. Each step pressed the air back from him as if he were pushing the world aside. People parted without realizing they'd moved. Veyra's breath caught when he stopped in front of her. His face was stone-still, unreadable, but his eyes were dark and sharp, studying her, as if searching for something only he knew to look for. He reached behind her, a glint of obsidian. The knife sliced through the rope in one clean motion. The final fiber snapped with a brittle crack. Veyra pitched forward, knees giving out. Raik caught her before she hit the frozen ground, one arm firm around her back. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Drex Malron sputtered, outrage twisting his voice. "What do you think you're doing? That's my prisoner." Reich turned his head just enough to look at him, his voice rolling low like distant thunder. "She belongs to no one. You can't take her. I'm taking her because you never had the right to touch her." He lifted Veyra Quinn as though she weighed nothing, her breath trembling hot against his coat. Someone cried out in protest, but no one stepped into his path, not with that blade still in his hand and that storm burning in his eyes. Drex shrieked after them, his voice cracking in panic. "She's running off with an Apache. You hear me? She's throwing herself at him." The crowd rippled shock, scandal, envy, fear. A few men cursed under their breath. A woman crossed herself. Someone muttered the girl was no better than her father. Another hissed that no white woman should let one of them touch her. Reich never looked back. He carried Veyra through the parted crowd, past the saloon's dark windows, past the blacksmith's forge where embers glowed faintly toward the far edge of Silver Cross. Behind them, the wind kicked up grit, flinging it against wooden storefronts. The hanging rope on the post swayed like a restless snake, and the town, hungry, frightened, and too proud to confess its own sins, began to murmur. She must have wanted him to take her. Why else would he risk this Indian lover, just like her father? Trouble clings to that family. But none of them knew the truth. Veyra Quinn was the daughter of the man who had burned Reich's village to ash, and Reich had recognized it the moment he saw her face. Reich's bay, scarred along its shoulder, waited at the far edge of town where the land sloped toward the dry arroyo. He shifted Veyra's weight in his arms, steadying her as she struggled for breath. The rope had carved raw, furious lines across her chest and neck. Frost clung to her lashes like tiny needles. "Put me down," she whispered, voice scraped thin. Reich didn't answer. He set her on her feet only once they reached the narrow mule trail beyond the last barn. She swayed, but he didn't reach out this time. He simply watched her arms folded, breath rolling slow and cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, more from the weight of the stairs she'd left behind than from the biting wind. Far-off shouts from the market square still bled into the air, anger, confusion, gossip, fear. Each sound struck her like a thrown stone. Reich turned toward the horses. "We ride. I'm not going anywhere with you," she snapped. "You won't live if you stay. That's none of your, you walk back now," he said. Voice flat as carved stone, and Drex Malron will finish what the rope started, and he'll blame me for stealing what he thinks is his toy. She flinched. "I'm not. I know what you're not." His tone was neither gentle nor cruel, only certain. Only truth matters. Veyra drew several shaky breaths, fighting the ache in her ribs. She glanced back toward Silver Cross, where the wind carried faint echoes of shouting. The truth settled over her, heavier than the cold. She no longer had a place in her own town. Reich swung onto his bay and jerked his chin toward the spare horse. "Get on!" The anger that had held her upright through humiliation twisted into something sharper. "Why did you do it?" Reich studied her from the saddle, unreadable. "Your breathing was stopping. That's not what I meant." He looked away the horizon, offering him an easier answer. "We ride." Despite her pride and every warning she'd ever heard about Apache men. Veyra climbed onto the chestnut mare. Her wrists burned where the rope had bitten deep. When Reich kicked his horse into a steady trot, she followed without instruction. They dipped into a dry wash, the earth cracked and pale. Mesquite branches scraped at their legs as they moved through. The trail bent east away from the rising spine of the Santa Cruz Ridge, and Silver Cross shrank behind them, until only the wind seemed to whisper its name. After a mile, Veyra couldn't keep quiet. "You shouldn't have said that," she muttered. "Said what? That I was that man's toy." The memory tasted like rust on her tongue. Reich didn't slow. "I said what he believes. Not what you are." His indifference scraped against her nerves. "You don't know what I am." He looked at her, Then a quick flick of the eyes, sharp enough to cut. I know enough. Heat rose in her cheeks. You don't know me at all. I know your face. Something in his voice shifted, tightened, darkened. Veyra pulled her mare to a halt. What's that supposed to mean? Reich stopped as well. His horse pawed at loose stones, unsettled by the tension crackling between them. The Apache warrior's gaze swept over her, slowly measured and deliberate, as if confirming a truth he had long suspected. Then he spoke a single word, a judgment delivered without hesitation. Quinn. The name struck Veyra Quinn like a hammer to the chest. My father's name, she whispered, her voice thin. Yes. And what of it? Reich didn't blink. Solvin Quinn burned Oak Canyon. 10 winters ago, a hollow opened in Veyra's stomach. She shook her head sharply as though she could scatter his words into the wind. That was a military operation, she whispered. They said your people attacked first. Reich let out a short, bitter laugh, the kind that belonged to a man wounded long before this day. Yes. That's what your officers claimed. They said we stole cattle. They said we killed a white woman. He leaned forward slightly in the saddle, his voice dropping into something low and terrible. The truth is this: your father's men rode into our village before sunrise. They burned our homes. They shot men as they ran. They shot children because they believed children could run too fast. Veyra's throat tightened, breath catching hard. Reich looked at her without blinking. My wife died that morning. The words fell between them like heavy logs tossed onto a dying fire, too heavy to move, too heavy to ignore. The ground seemed to tilt under Veyra. She clung to the saddle horn to keep herself steady. I didn't know she managed. I didn't know any of that. No, he said softly. You did not. I'm not my father. That is what every child says, he replied, voice carved from old scars. A gust of wind swept through the wash, kicking dust into thin spirals. The silence deepened until Veyra wanted to scream, just to break it. Why? Her voice trembled. Why save me then, if you knew who I was? Reich's jaw worked, muscles tightening. He nudged his horse forward, forcing her to follow. When he finally answered, his words drifted on the wind. Because I know what it is to watch someone die with no one to speak the truth for them. I will not stand where your father once stood. She had no answer, none that mattered, none that. They rode for another hour, the land flattening into winter-browned stretches of grass. Jackrabbits darted in the distance. A lone hawk circled high above. Shame, confusion, and anger twisted inside Veyra until she felt hollowed out. Part of her wanted to deny everything Reich said. Yet the quiet weight in his voice, shaped by grief and memory, made denial feel like cowardice. Finally she whispered, If I had known, if anyone had told me Reich didn't look her way, you would have done nothing. You could have done nothing. That is how history keeps its shape. A lump rose in her throat. So you hate me? Not yet. Yet I do not hate ghosts, he said. But I hate the fire they leave behind. For one heartbeat, Veyra thought he meant to leave her there, on the cracked earth. But he kept riding. The steady rhythm of his horse echoed through the emptiness. Ahead, the land climbed toward a ridge. The sky darkened with thick winter clouds. Reich pointed with 2 fingers. We reach shelter before the storm, he said. Then we see if we live through what comes next. His tone held no threat, only truth. And that truth chilled her more than the wind. By the time the ridge rose before them, the sky had turned the dull color of old lead. The air carried that eerie stillness that always came before a desert storm, a hush that unsettled animals and rattled men. Veyra hugged her coat tighter as the wind shoved against her, smelling of iron and coming snow. Reich pressed his bay forward, leading them along a narrow path skirting a line of boulders. The horses snorted breath, drifting in pale clouds. The ridge dipped sharply, revealing 4 squat buildings half buried in wind-blown sand. Old Santiago. From a distance it looked abandoned. Up close it looked forsaken. The adobe walls, once whitewashed, had cracked like dried clay bowls. The old corral posts lay collapsed inward. A wagon wheel sat half-buried, spokes broken and darkened. A sun-faded sign, half Spanish, half English, hung crooked on two rusted nails. Quarantine. Keep out. Veyra swallowed. Is it safe? No, Reich said. But safer than the men behind us. He slipped off his horse with a fluid grace and motioned for her to follow. When her boots hit the ground, she hissed the cold, made the rope burns on her wrists feel newly raw. Inside, Reich said, the main building's door sagged on its hinges. He shoved it open with his shoulder, sending dust swirling in a slow choking bloom. The room beyond was dim lit only by faint daylight, leaking through warped wooden slats. Old bunks sagged along one wall, their straw long rotted away. A pot-bellied stove leaned in the corner. Its rusted pipes split clean through. The faint smell of old smoke and lingering sickness clung to the air like something that refused to loosen its grip. What was this place? Veyra asked. Trading post, then? Army stopover, Reich said. Later, a quarantine pen for sick cattle. He pointed toward a dark stain on the far wall. Then a place where men made promises they never kept. She shivered, not from cold. Reich moved past her and tossed down an old saddle blanket he'd found draped over a broken crate. When he folded it once and set it near the stove, she realized he was making a spot for her to sit. You don't have to do that. I don't want you collapsing again. The bluntness silenced her. Her pride flickered weakly, like a flame starved of air. Reich crouched beside the stove, testing the pipe. He gave a short nod. I'll bring wood. When he stepped outside, the silence swallowed everything whole. Veyra's heartbeat thudded too loudly in the dim room. She rubbed her raw wrists, staring at the twin bruises the rope had carved there, perfect circles like shackles. Her eyes drifted across the room. A corner table held a cracked ceramic cup and a ledger so old the ink had bled into ghost smears. A row of iron hooks lined the wall. One still clutched a strip of leather, stiff as bone. Against another wall stood an old cot, its blanket half melted into the metal springs from some long-ago fire. This place carried ghosts, quiet, patient ghosts. She moved to a battered trunk near the bunk. Its lid lay open, revealing scraps of cloth, a tiny toy horse carved from mesquite, and near the bottom something else. A necklace, a charm string, roughly woven. One edge had been burned. The wooden beads blackened. A small turquoise chip hung from a sinew cord, cracked straight through, as if split by heat or force. A tightness gathered in Veyra's chest. She lifted it gently, afraid it might crumble. Footsteps sounded. Reich stepped back inside with an armful of wood, stamping snow from his boots. When he saw what she held, he froze. Veyra looked up. This was hers, wasn't it? He set the wood down slowly. His breath came rough, like it scraped its way out. How did it get here? She asked. His answer took time to surface. This is where I found her body, he said at last. Not far from here. Soldiers brought anyone they thought might still be alive. Most weren't. Veyra's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't say that. I mean it. It changes nothing. His voice wasn't angry, just hollow in a way that frightened her more than rage. She placed the charm string back as gently as if setting down a sleeping child. Reich knelt by the stove again, stacking wood with sharp, precise motions. If you want to hate me, Veyra whispered, I'd understand. He didn't look at her. Hate is easy. Too easy. Then what? He closed the stove door with a metallic snap. I won't carry your father's sins for him, but I won't pretend your face doesn't remind me of them. She flinched as though struck. My father never spoke of this, she whispered. He never told me. Of course not. Reich rose to his full height. The guilty speak only of victory. A low crack of thunder rolled across the sky. The air grew colder. Snow began falling thin at first, then heavier. Swirling frantically past the broken doorway, Reich's eyes tracked the storm, his shoulders stiffening. They're coming! Veyra felt the blood ice in her veins. Drex Malron. And the others. Reich grabbed his rifle case from where it rested by the saddle. They'll follow our trail until the snow buries it. We have an hour, maybe less. What do we do? He checked the chamber of his carbine eyes, narrowing with grim certainty. We survive. Veyra's breath shook. You think they'll kill us both? They'll kill me, he said. For you, they'll choose something slower. Her stomach twisted. Then Reich added almost reluctantly, unless you want to go back. No. Her voice cut through the cold with surprising force. I won't crawl back to that man. I won't be his victim again. Reich studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether this was panic or something stronger. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something new. Something that recognized her as more than a burden. Good. Fear keeps you alive. He tightened his grip on the rifle. But truth keeps you standing. Wind shrieked through the cracks of old Santiago. Snow hammered the adobe walls like thrown gravel. The storm had finally caught up to them, and so had the men chasing their tracks. Reich moved toward the doorway, bracing his rifle along the warped frame. Veyra Quinn stood behind him, her breath steady, even though her hands trembled. Somewhere in the white roar beyond the ridge, a horse screamed into the wind. Then another. They're close, Reich whispered. The first rider pushed through the swirling white curtain, little more than a shape, struggling to hold a human outline. 3 more forms followed, bent low against the punishing snow. Veyra sucked in a sharp breath, pulse thundering. Reich didn't shift his aim, didn't even blink. He didn't fire. Not yet. The lead rider paused near the collapsed corral snow, piling on his shoulders until he looked carved from ash. He shouted something lost to the wind, then nudged his horse toward the main building. Reich exhaled once long and calm. They haven't found us yet, he murmured. Should we hide? Veyra whispered. No. They'll tear this place apart. Hiding just means dying slower. His quiet certainty terrified her more than shouting ever could. The riders dismounted, boots crunching like splintered glass in the brittle snow. Drex Malron was not with them, only townsmen rough and hungry, eager to crush whoever seemed weaker than they were. One held a lantern, its flame battered by the wind. Another carried a rope coiled over his shoulder like a promise. What do we do? Veyra breathed. Reich slid his knife free. We make them think this place has sharper teeth than it does. Before she could ask what he meant, he moved fast, silent, as a cougar slipping between rocks. He crossed the room and tore 2 strips of canvas from a shattered cot, shoving one toward her. Cover your face, he said. What, why? So they don't claim a white woman hid behind an Apache. You must be someone else to them. She hesitated, then wrapped the cloth around her nose and mouth. Her breath warmed the fabric quickly, fear soaking into the weave. And you, she whispered. Reich tied the second strip across his own face. They already know me. A heavy pounding struck the door. Anyone in there? A man called, his voice thick with cold and suspicion. Reich motioned Veyra behind the stove, angling her where she'd vanish into shadow. If the door flew inward. Then he stepped toward the entrance without a sound, rifle lowered but ready. Another hammering thud. Open up! We lost the trail in the storm. Need shelter, someone added. Veyra clenched her fists. A lie. They'd tracked them here. She felt it deep in her bones. Reich lifted the bar and cracked the door open, staying behind it as snow sliced inward. The lantern holder squinted through the gap. Well, hell, the man muttered. This place is still standing. You alone in here? Another asked. Reich remained silent. Speak up, the man snapped. You deaf? Or Reich raised the rifle slowly, not aiming just enough to choke the words from the man's throat. What do you want? Reich asked, his voice edged with frost. We're looking for a girl, the man said. A thief. And the Apache that ran off with her. Veyra's stomach nodded. Storm eats tracks, Reich said. Storm eats fools. Why hunt death out here? The man swallowed. We just want what's ours. Ours? Reich repeated the word sharp as obsidian. The girl belongs to you. The man faltered. Not me. But Drex says Reich stepped forward, just enough to force him back. Drex Malrin lies. The rope carrier shifted uneasy. We ain't looking for trouble. Then leave, Reich said. Before trouble finds you. The lantern flickered wildly. Snow hissed across the ground like angry sand. The men exchanged glances, but pride kept them rooted, where common sense should have pulled them away. Then the rope carrier said, Folks saw her ride off with you. Word is, she wanted to. Rage lit Veyra's chest like sudden fire. Before thought could stop her, she stepped out of the shadows. The man froze. Even with half her face covered, her eyes blazed hot enough to cut through the storm. She didn't look like someone cowering behind an Apache. She looked like someone who had finally found the fire she'd been missing. She didn't realize she'd been holding the anger until it burst out of her. You think I went with him? Veyra Quinn said, her voice shaking with fury. You think I'd run to any of you for mercy after what you let that man do to me? Recognition flickered across their faces. One muttered, It's her. Veyra stepped closer. You watched Drex Malrin drag me from my own home. You watched him tie me like stock meant for slaughter. And when he claimed I stole food, every one of you nodded like cattle. The men shifted uneasily, but none dared speak. Reich watched her, his expression unreadable, but something new stirred behind his eyes. Something like respect. Veyra pointed her fury at the lantern carrier. Drex lied to protect his pride, and all of you let him do it. Now you want to drag me back and finish what he started? No? Her voice cracked across the storm. You want to silence me? Snow whipped between them like shards of glass. The lantern holder swallowed hard. We didn't know. You knew enough, she snapped. Thunder growled overhead as the storm thickened. Reich moved then, stepping beside her, close enough she could feel the heat of him through the cold. He raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, but letting its presence do the talking. You've heard your answer, he said. Leave. The lantern holder hesitated, torn between shame and stubbornness. Then he jerked his chin. Let's go. Ain't worth freezing to death over. The rope carrier opened his mouth to argue until he saw Veyra's eyes blazing with pain and something newly sharpened. He backed away. Moments later, the storm devoured all of them, their shapes swallowed by the whirling white. Veyra stood trembling not from cold, but from all the fury and fear roaring back into her bones. Reich shut the door and dropped the bar into place. Wind battered it instantly like winter claws trying to pry inside. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Reich said quietly, You stood when you could have hidden. Veyra met his gaze. I'm tired of hiding. Something flickered in his eyes, not warmth exactly, but a recognition of strength. He nodded once. Good. You'll need that. This isn't over. A gust slammed the building, dust drifting down like falling ash. No, Veyra whispered. It's just beginning. By dawn, the storm thinned to a gray, hungry sky. The world lay buried beneath a fresh layer of white. Old Santiago sat quiet under frost, its adobe walls softened by cold. The tracks from the night's visitors had already begun to fade thin scars, disappearing under drifting snow. Reich saddled the horses before the sun cleared the ridge, his movements crisp and deliberate like a man preparing for war. Veyra watched him pull the girth tight, his breath rising in steady clouds. You're not saying anything, she said. There is nothing easy to say, he answered. Then say something hard. He paused. Wind lifted a strand of her hair across her mouth. She brushed it away, weary and frightened though, trying not to show it. Reich finally looked at her. Truth cuts both ways. Hold it too long and we both bleed. Veyra swallowed, hating that she understood him. He mounted his bay. We ride for Red Hollow before the next storm hits. If we stay, the men from town will get bold again. They'll come back, she asked. They will. And next time they won't ask questions. She climbed onto her chestnut mare, her muscles stiff from the cold stone floor. And what do we do in Red Hollow? We stop the lies before they turn into more violence, Reich said. And Drex Malloran will be there. His kind always runs toward the story they think they can control. That chilled her more than the wind. They rode into the pale morning hooves, cracking the thin crusts of snow. The desert stretched out white, silent waiting. Mesquite branches sagged under frost, each thorn capped with ice. The world felt sharpened to a blade's edge. Do you think they'll listen to me? Veyra asked. Reich didn't answer at once. When a town fears hunger, it listens to the loudest voice, he said. Right now, the loudest voice is Drex Malloran. So. No. He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat, she saw something almost gentle. If they don't listen to you, they'll listen to his fear. My fear, she asked. No, Reich said. Drex's fear. A man like him fears being cornered far more than he fears the noose. And you plan to corner him. I plan to give your truth a place to stand, and then watch him fall apart. Their horses climbed the ridge, and Red Hollow spread open before them. It wasn't quite a canyon, more like a long, narrow wound, carved between towering red rock walls, sharp as cut glass and tall as church steeples. The only way through funneled straight toward Silver Cross. Reich reined in his horse at the mouth of the hollow. A cluster of riders waited near the center. 6 men lanterns, still burning from the night before. The warm flicker danced across their rifles. At their head sat Drex Malloran. His horse snorted thick clouds of steam, the metal bit crusted with frost. Drex had his coat buttoned tight, but his face burned with something hotter than cold rage, and pride twisted under his skin like coiled snakes. Veyra felt Reich's horse tense beneath them. She straightened in the saddle, ignoring the sting that pulsed along her wrists. There he is. Drex's voice cracked through the morning like a whip. The little thief who ran off with her Apache savior. Veyra didn't wait for Reich. She nudged her mare forward until she stood clear of his shadow. Tell the truth, Drex, her voice carried across the red stone. You're not here for justice. You're here because you're afraid. Drex barked a harsh laugh. Afraid of what? Your stories, your virtue. Afraid of what happens if this town discovers what you did to me, and what you've done to others? A ripple of unease passed through the men behind him. Reich rode forward calm and steady as the iron petroglyphs carved into the canyon walls. Step down, Drex. Drex's sneer twitched. You don't get to give orders here. Then take it as advice. Drex's expression darkened to stone. I'm taking the girl, and you, Apache, will answer for kidnapping her. Veyra snapped back. You kidnapped me. You monster. You tied me to a post and told the town I was a thief because I wouldn't let you touch me. The nearest rider stiffened. Another shifted uneasily in his saddle. Drex's fist tightened around the reins like he meant to strangle them. Veyra pressed harder. Tell them how you dragged me from my home. Tell them how you planted that sack of flour. Tell them how you said I'd earned your protection. The men exchanged wary, confused looks. They'd always known Drex was a bully, but a liar, a predator. A man who used hunger to corner a girl. That was a different kind of rot. Drex's face flushed a deep, ugly purple. Lies, every bit of it. Veyra reached into her coat. Drex's eyes widened, expecting a gun. Instead, she pulled out the torn corner of his own store ledger, ripped during their struggle the night he trapped her. A corner still smudged with his fingerprint in spilled molasses. You told me your wife never checked the storeroom at night, Veyra said, and that no one would believe a girl over you. This proves otherwise. The murmurs rose louder now. Drex's restraint shattered. Enough. He jerked his revolver free. Reich moved first. The Apache warrior kicked his horse forward, launching from the saddle in one fluid leap. Snow exploded beneath him. His hand clamped around Drex's wrist before the gun fully rose. Drex screamed. Bone cracked. The revolver clattered across the thin crust of snow. Reich slammed Drex off his horse and drove him into the ground. The thud echoed off the stone walls like a war drum. Drex's men froze stunned. By the time one reached for a rifle, Reich already stood over their leader, blade drawn. But Veyra's voice cut through the cold air before blood could spill. No. Reich stopped, chest heaving. She rode closer, frost crunching beneath her mare's hooves. We don't need another death, she said. We need truth. Drex whimpered under Reich's grip. Veyra addressed the riders. My name is Veyra Quinn. I may carry my father's name, but I won't carry his sins. Look at Drex. Look at what he tried to do. The men shifted heads, lowering. Truth, raw and undeniable, hung thick between the canyon walls. Finally, one of them muttered, Maybe we ought to take him in. Another nodded. Let the marshal decide. No one stood with Drex. For the first time since the rope of fear tightened around her ribs, Veyra felt the pressure ease just a fraction. Reich shoved Drex away and released him. The man collapsed into the snow, clutching his shattered wrist. The canyon seemed to exhale storm violence, lies everything breaking open at once. Veyra Quinn drew a long breath of raw morning air. Beside her, Reich wiped snow from his blade, his eyes dark as the stone cliffs surrounding them. This changes things, he said quietly. Yes, she whispered. It changes everything. By afternoon, the clouds had thinned into long gray veils drifting over Silver Cross. The narrow passage through Red Hollow lay behind them, its red stone walls still echoing the shouts and confessions that had broken a town's silence wide open. Drex Malrun had been hauled away by the same riders, who once followed him, men now ashamed, uncertain what justice demanded, but certain he couldn't be allowed his freedom anymore. Veyra and Reich rode behind them, not fugitives, not accusers, but two people who needed the truth, witnessed by more than wind and snow. Silver Cross looked different as they approached. Storms always changed a town, but today that change felt heavier. Smoke curled from chimneys. A few townsfolk lingered by the main road, watching them approach. Narrowed eyes, whispered doubts pooling like fog. Not fear, Veyra realized. Not quite. More like people waiting for the wind to decide which way it would blow before they chose their next words. Reich slowed his horse at the edge of town. You don't have to face them, he said. I do. Veyra replied. Not for them, for me. His jaw tightened, as if he didn't like it, but he honored the truth in her voice. They rode side by side into the square, the same place where she had come within a breath of losing her life that morning. The post still stood in the center. The rope dangled like a severed accusation. Children stared from behind their mothers' skirts. A few men removed their hats. Brant Carr, the sheriff, weathered heavy-browed a man, whose hands looked too gentle for the gun on his hip, stepped forward. His gaze swept from Veyra's bruised face to Reich's unreadable calm. We heard what happened in Red Hollow, he said quietly. Veyra dismounted, boots sinking into slush. Her knees shook, but she refused to let her voice follow. I have the ledger piece right here, she said. The witnesses are coming in with Drex. You'll hear the same story from each of them. Carr nodded. Then truth will stand. Behind him stepped Scylla, the baker's wife, who once looked away when Drex grabbed Veyra's arm. Her eyes glistened with regret. I should have spoken sooner, she murmured. Veyra held her gaze. Many should have. Scylla's lips trembled as she nodded and stepped back. Another man approached, Var Calder, the rancher known for siding with whichever way the wind blew. This time he didn't look away from Veyra, or from Reich. Folks said things. About you, he muttered. About you and him. Veyra straightened. And you believed them. Var's shoulders slumped. We were wrong. Reich dismounted, boots landing softly in the snow. His presence drew silence the way the tide pulls back from shore. He looked first at Var, then at the others, gathering around. Words, he said, are often more dangerous than rifles. The townsfolk lowered their eyes. Sheriff Carr cleared his throat. Drex Malron will face the territorial judge when he rides through in April. Until then, he'll stay locked up. And me, Veyra asked. Carr blinked, startled. You're not under arrest. You let them hang me once, she said quietly. His mouth twisted with regret. I can't change this morning, Miss Quinn. But I can change tomorrow. Veyra nodded, not forgiving, but accepting that some truths thaw slower than snow. A long silence settled. Then Var Calder spoke again, hesitant. You'll be staying in town then. Veyra looked around at the post, the rope, the guilt flickering behind eyes that once watched her choke. She felt the weight of her father's name, Solvin Quinn, and the sins he had dragged across the desert like a rusted chain. No, she said softly. I won't. Her gaze drifted to Rake. He hadn't stepped closer. He hadn't asked. He hadn't assumed. He only watched her with that same steady, unflinching calm, the kind that saw through lies hers. His, the town's, everyone's. Sheriff Carr dipped his hat. If you ever want to come back, he said, you'll be safe here. Veyra didn't correct him. Safety was more than the absence of danger. It was the presence of truth. And she needed truth. She turned to Reich. Where will you go now? He lifted one shoulder in a quiet shrug. South, maybe. Toward the river. Horses will need better grazing once spring comes. She bit her lip. Do you want company? The question hung between them like breath suspended in the cold throat of winter. Reich studied her. Not the bruises, not the fear, not the fragile pride, but her. The woman who had stood in front of a mob. The woman who spoke her truth without trembling. The woman who carried Solvin Quinn's blood, yet refused to bow under the weight of it. I don't want you following me, because you have nowhere else to go, he said softly. I'm not. Veyra murmured. I'm choosing where else is. Something flickered in Reich's eyes, a thaw, a brief, unguarded warmth breaking through the winter inside him. He stepped closer. Then he said, you ride with me until the snow lets go. Her breath didn't shake this time, it steadied. And after that, after he said, we see where the land carries us. They mounted their horses as the pale midday sun fought its way through thinning clouds. Neither of them looked back at the post in the square. The townsfolk watched in rare silence as an Apache warrior and a white woman rode out of Silver Cross side by side. Their tracks disappeared almost instantly beneath the slush. For the first time all winter, the wind carried no judgment, only possibility. And somewhere beyond the ridge where the world opened into wide plains and new mornings, the snow finally began to melt. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.